All right, guys, what's going on? Welcome back to the Everything College Football podcast. Today, me and Nick here, we're doing a Week 0 preview and prediction for Stanford versus Hawaii going down in Honolulu. The spread has shifted significantly. Stanford had opened as a couple-point favorite. Now it's -2 in favor of the Rainbow Warriors. 53 is the total. 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time on CBS. This figures to be a pretty compelling contest. Getting things started with the Stanford offense against the Hawaii defense. The Cardinal offense has been, pretty abysmal for a couple of years now. They returned only 4 starters after scoring less than 23 points per contest. Of course, in the portal, they ended up losing 2 of their top guys. Alec Manor went to the draft. Emmett Mosley transfers out. And obviously, depth is not ideal at this program. So, the only 4 starters you get back are mainly just spot guys like at running back and some guys up front. E.J. Brown, though, is going to take over at quarterback. This is a guy I think who can be highly impressive. An ex-4-star out of modern day. Played a little bit last year, but not much. A very small sample size against SMU. He had 30-plus passing attempts. That was one of the better defenses in the country and a playoff team. He was all right in that contest, below average for sure. The thing is, he's just not going to have many weapons to deal with. I think the tight end Sam Roush is going to be a guy who commands a lot of targets this year. He was, one of the last good tight ends to come from David Shaw's little factory he had for a little bit. 6'5", 260, had 40 receptions last year. I think he's going to get about 10 to 15 targets in this contest. He's a guy that is going to be leading the way because the receiving group is mainly made up of transfers. C.J. Williams, I think, will be your top guy. He played at USC and Wisconsin with marginal production, but I think in a contest like this, it better suits his skills. And you're really not sure what the approach will be from Stanford. Is it going to be a pass-heavy approach, a run-heavy? Because last year the run game had signs of life, but it certainly did struggle for the most part. Only 132 yards per game for the year. But they did have 200-plus yards in conference play games, that is, and they also had in total 350-plus yard games to note. While Hawaii run defense, Nick, really wasn't all that good last year. This is a group that got burned numerous times. In total, 165 yards per contest allowed. They ended the year on a streak of giving up 290-plus yards in 3 straight games to end the year. And those weren't exactly good opponents outside of UNLV. They played, the likes of Utah State and New Mexico, and they're getting absolutely scorched on the ground by those guys. So I think this might be a clear edge for Stanford because, again, even though the run attack has been lifeless for the last couple of years, it did show some signs that I was impressed with last year, Nick, and with your top 3 running backs returning. I think they're going to be looking to feed these guys in a clearer edge you could potentially have in this matchup.
Look, Stanford's offense was abysmal last year. 22.8 points per game just isn't a good enough number in the ACC. 3.64 yards per attempt on the ground last year. Brutal number. Below 4, not good. Below 5 in terms of yards per play, 4.82 last year. Just brutal across the board. They start a quarterback, Elijah Brown, E.J. Brown. It's kind of interesting that the 2 quarterbacks starting this game both went to high-level high schools. Brown went to Mater Dei. Hawaii's quarterback went to Bishop Gorman out of Las Vegas. Those are 2 top-tier high schools in California and Nevada that their quarterbacks are starting in this matchup in Week 0. I find that kind of a funny little note there. He was decent at Mater Dei. He was a high-level recruit coming out of high school. He showed some flashes, but also made some mistakes last year through a pick. So I think Brown, in a full year as a starter, could be solid, but he might have some growing pains early on in this matchup. I think Sam Roush is a really good target at tight end. He should get a ton of the targets. C.J. Williams will command some more targets at that wide receiver X position. Micah Ford thinks a good back. I think Stanford, if they want to win this game, they're going to run the ball through Ford, see what he can do on the ground, try to get him involved. Chris Davis is also not a bad asset to try and get him involved on the ground. This was not a phenomenal rushing attack for Stanford last year at all. And, 3.64 yards per attempt just isn't good enough when you're really thinking about it. And I don't know if they'll be able to get as much production on the ground as they would hope so. There are some assets I like on this defense for Hawaii. They bring back some talented pieces in the secondary, some decent pieces on the defensive line as well that could certainly help out. They were good against the pass, struggled against the run. If they show some improvement against the run, they can make things tough for Stanford here.
Talk about that Rainbow Warriors secondary, 49th last year against the pass. It's pretty good. They only snagged 6 interceptions though. They lose their top 3 corners. That is, they do get back both safeties. Peter Manuma, he was the strongest. He was very good in running against the coverage. Elijah Palmer, on the other hand, was also pretty good in coverage out of the slot. In terms of their top pass rusher coming back, Jackie Johnson, that's great. They did have 27 sacks. They're pretty consistent in conference play. Going up against an offensive line has just been abysmal. And we had positive things to say in terms of potential improvement for Stanford up front, but we don't think it's going to be anything too crazy. So I think that's certainly an area they could win. At the line of scrimmage, they shouldn't be too overwhelmed. Jalen Smith, Jamie Otis both got on field a good bit at linebacker. Those guys were adequate run defenders. So I think the defense for Hawaii does get back some solid assets. And again, that run defense, though, just had a few great games. Like the UCLA game was impressive. I think it was against teams like Nevada and Fresno State. They were great, but they also had a lot of very poor ones. So that's the concern, right? 5 games with 230 plus rushing yards that's a concern, Nick. That's how many they allowed last year. I'd consider this a weaker opponent in Stanford for sure. So I think Stanford, though, they're going to look to pound the rock. 150 plus yards is the expectation for me in this one. And I like to see Brown showcase his talents as the next high-rated 4-star. So I think Hawaii, they're in for a respectable performance on defense, but I think Stanford, they can exploit some stuff here, Nick. The losses at cornerback and that rushing attack, and I think they can put in a pretty respectable effort in this game on Saturday.
Yeah, I certainly think that the Stanford or the Hawaii defenses will have a decent day in the secondary. I like some of the pieces. I like what they have at linebacker. And then they can get some good pressure on the quarterback. I think Jackie Johnson's a guy we're going to highlight who could be really good and really put some good pressure on that offensive line. I think the offensive line, overall for Stanford, it will be an improved unit, but how much of an improvement? It was a pretty woeful unit last year. Expect some growing pains in week one. I think Stanford will have success running the ball, but not as much as some people think. I think they'll struggle in some aspects trying to figure it all out. I think Hawaii will have a solid first half against the run. Maybe in the second half, Stanford will start to get things clicking. But overall, I do think this will turn out to be a solid showing for this Stanford or Hawaii running defense that is the Stanford offense. I think will struggle at certain points and make some mistakes here and there, which will certainly show on the score sheet and reflect in the box score at the end of the day. I just think there's some serious talent on this Hawaii defense that will step up and be solid this year. And Stanford has a young running back room, a young offensive line, and a quarterback that hasn't really played a whole lot. So I don't know how much they're going to test him potentially downfield with limited weapons. Expect a lot of short throws to the tight end, a lot of short throws to the backs as well as they try to play the short game and really move the ball down the field in that regard.
Now we're going to move to the other side of the ball where Hawaii's offense will take on a Stanford defense. And you talk about matchups. There's a great matchup on one side, it appears, and here on the other side, there's an even greater matchup with this passing attack against a Stanford secondary that was incredibly woeful last year. You start with the new quarterback. It seemed like it was going to be a three-way battle for quarterback, but I think redshirt freshman Micah Alejado, it's clear that he's going to be the starter. He put on a clinic in his first career start. It was a season finale against New Mexico. He had 469 yards and 5 scores in what was a shootout victory. So I think it's pretty, clear and cut that he's going to be the starter. He also had 54 rushing in that game to lead the team. So this guy gets inserted into the lineup. I know the defense he was playing against New Mexico wasn't all that good. I don't care, Nick. When you're a first-time starter and you play that well, that's got to do a lot for your confidence. And it's even greater when you're getting your top 2 pass catchers back to work with. You got Nick Senecal, Pavel Ashlock. Both had 600-plus yards and 6 touchdowns each last year. I think these guys are so capable of handling a high-volume amount of targets, and I think that's what you're going to see out of Alejado. I think it's quite clear what Hawaii's going to look to do. I'll talk about the Stanford secondary here a little bit more extensively, Nick, but this seems to be, on paper, a great matchup going into this game. I do think that secondary for Stanford, with everyone coming back, is going to be vastly improved, though, so don't count on them being as poor as they were last year. But if you're a Hawaii fan, or you're even on the team, you're looking at this trio right here as the ones that lead you to a victory.
Yeah, like Alejado starting here, I think this kid's going to be phenomenal. And really, this is a small sample size, but a pretty impressive sample size. Talk about the New Mexico game: 57 attempts, 65% comp rate, 469 yards passing, and 5 touchdowns. Yeah, that's pretty damn good. A really impressive performance. But I also think you want to highlight some of his minutes against Utah State a couple weeks prior: 11 of 12 for 111 yards and a touchdown in relief in that game. He was really solid in that game as well. Product out of Bishop Gorman High School. He was pretty solid athlete in high school for that high-level program in the state of Nevada. So I think he's a guy you want to look at. I like what they have at wide receiver, some interesting talent overall that you alluded to, some guys that return that could be really good. Getting the top 2 pass catchers back is always something nice if you're a fan of this team. I think both these guys that they return could be really solid again this year for this team. It's good experience to have back in your pass catching group, which I think if you're Timmy Chang and company, you really like seeing that. This is what you want to see in your top 2 receivers. I think Cancela, Ashlock are 2 really solid players, especially Ashlock. I think he'll have a great year this year. 6 touchdowns for him last year, 630 yards receiving. He should be a key asset for this offense. I like what they return in both of those guys. This was an offense for Hawaii last year that, yes, it wasn't phenomenal, 3.45 yards per attempt on the ground, not great, but they were better through the air, 5.35 yards per play. So that shows to me that they were a little bit better throwing the ball than they were running the ball. They had over 3,000 yards passing last year, had 25 touchdowns, that is, to 15 interceptions. So a decently positive ratio, a little bit there. So I like what they can do through the air. I think the quarterback play will be really improved for Hawaii this year. You got a young gunslinger under center as well as your top 2 receivers back. That seems like a pretty good recipe for me.
Now let's pull it back down to earth a little bit because that was a lot of upside. We just gave them a lot of praise. The run game, though, was pretty useless last year. This is a run and shoot offense, like 97 yards per game on the ground. That's probably why they struggled so much in terms of scoring. They had 6 games of less than 100 yards. The offensive line does return 3 starters. It was a poor group, though, 126th in sacks allowed. And the good news is David Bailey is not in town anymore, but they still have a phenomenal pass rusher to Stanford. Tavara Tafiti, this guy was right behind him. He was a highly touted recruit as well in the same class as Bailey, had 7 TFL, 3.5 sacks. He's going to take over as the alpha dog for that defense. So there's certainly some matchups I know he's craving. They had, one thing for Hawaii I forgot to mention is they do pick up Jackson Harris via transfer receiver. Spent 2 years at Stanford. Maybe a revenge game for him as well. In the Cardinal defense, they were poor, right? Nearly 34 points a game allowed. Run defense really wasn't that bad though. 41st nationally. Only had a few outings where they were poor. In this defensive line, we've criticized them for years for being, not great when it comes to a lack of depth and size. But now I think they're improved in that area. They've gotten a little bit bigger. They have established veterans. Everyone up front was pretty much a starter last year. Guys like Zach Buckley, Zach Rowell, Anthony Franklin. So I think this defensive line, it might be a better matchup for them compared to most in the conference. And, despite being so poor last year against the pass, I credit them in our preseason preview with returning all 5 starters in the back end, and they have great upside. Guys like Scotty Edwards, Colin Wright. I love the addition of Jordan Washington at corner. And so Alejado, he went off against the defense that was just as bad as Stanford's last year, and I think he's going to be maybe licking his chops in this one, but I wouldn't think too fast, my friend Nick. I really think Stanford's going to improve on defense this year, and this is not the hardest of matchups for them despite being incredibly bad.
The Stanford defense was brutal last year. 33.7 points per game just isn't good. 6.4 yards per play, 4.23 yards per attempt on the ground. Although that's not a horrible number. The run defense did show some life, but that shows me that the pass defense was absolutely brutal, and it was 131st in the nation. I think the recipe here for Hawaii is pretty simple. Don't overthink it. Don't run the ball too much because they were bad at running the ball last year. Throw the ball, throw the ball, throw the ball. I'm expecting 60 attempts, maybe 50, 60 attempts from their quarterback. Just absolutely sling the rock. There's no reason to really run the ball here. Trust your quarterback. Put them in an opportunity to kind of go and attack this secondary for Stanford. Yes, it's improved. I like some of the players they have. I think Jordan Washington was a decent add at left corner. Brandon Nicholson starting at right corner. He's a true freshman last year. He showed some signs of improvement. Scotty Edwards, Mitch Libar. Those are some solid pieces, but I think you can attack this secondary and really put a good showing up. Just go after them, throw the ball, pick them out, target your top receivers there, where you have 3 number ones that I think could be really solid for this Hawaii passing attack. I just don't think they're going to be effective running the ball last year. You saw them struggle 3.45 yards per attempt for this Hawaii offense on the ground. Obviously, that's not good enough. They returned their backfield pretty much from last year, but Landon Sims, Cam Barfield, none of these guys were super crazy screaming off the page for me. So I think it makes a lot of sense. If you're going to try and win this game, if you're Hawaii at home, just throw the ball, get comfortable in your setup, throw the ball downfield, attack over the middle as well, try and attack some of these linebackers for Stanford as well, trying to find a way to put some opportunities to get big passing play, big opportunities, because this was a pass defense that was absolutely brutal last year. They'll be better this year, but they'll still be pretty bad. This is a big opportunity. This is a Hawaii team or a Stanford team that gave up over 400 points last year total, a really bad number. Go out and attack them, try to hit them downfield, and similar to the playbook you ran against New Mexico when this quarterback was in, attack downfield, attack over the top, and try and get those big chunk plays.
Now I move to the final analysis and the prediction. The thing about Hawaii is they've just never really been good in these opening games. They were 50-point favorites last year. We were all over the Rainbow Warriors spread, and they ended up being up 7 points going into the fourth quarter against a team that's 2-22 across the last 2 years now. They lost to Stanford in week 2 in 2023 in Hawaii by 2 scores. That was also a very close line, one that people felt Hawaii could probably win in. 2022, me and Nick had a friendly wager on the Vanderbilt game. They ended up losing that one 63-10. A week later, they got blown out by Western Kentucky. For some reason, early on in the year, it doesn't matter really who they're playing, especially not against a Power 4 opponent. They're not going to do very well, it seems to be the trend. And I think this game really comes down to who do you think is going to have the stronger edge and what seems to be clear advantages in certain areas. Like the Hawaii offense seems to have a pretty good edge in the pass game, right? But I think the Cardinals secondary is going to show its improvements, and I think Hawaii's going to struggle to defend the balance I think Stanford should have, where I think their run game has a pretty good nod over that run defense for Hawaii. So I think 150-plus rushings on the docket. I think Brown will have a good day to get him over the edge. This is going to be an interesting game. Me and Nick, once again, have a friendly wager on this one. I'm all over Stanford. He's all over Hawaii. This one I'm certainly probably a little bit more nervous about, but probably not as much when we finally get kicked off on CBS Best bet's going to be Stanford money line for me. The trend has just not been favorable on Hawaii, Nick, and you're putting all your cards on Mitch Alahu, who had a phenomenal game in his first career start, but it's possible he's going to come back down to earth here as we get a new season started. I don't want to call him a one-hit wonder or anything. He's certainly going to have a great opportunity to prove he's a great player, but I'm not going to overreact to just one game when I've seen the entire body of work over the last couple of years of this football team in matchups like this.
Those who are longtime listeners to this show know that me and Hawaii have a relationship like a bad girlfriend on week 0. I keep going back to it. I keep trying to make this happen. I keep thinking Hawaii's going to go out and get something done. I've been burned by them a couple of times, got burned by them last year. Thought they were going to blow out their token opposition, Delaware State. That didn't happen. I thought they were going to be competitive with Vandy a couple of years ago. That didn't happen. And that line, I think, was like 9.5. They ended up losing by a fortune in that one as well. So me and Hawaii on week 0, it's like a bad relationship. I keep going back to it. But again, this year, I think I'm falling for it, although I feel pretty good about it this year. I love what they have at quarterback. I think their quarterback is phenomenal. I think he can be an incredible asset under center. I saw in that New Mexico game, the tape, I thought was phenomenal. And when I look at this matchup here, I think the two things that stand out to me, right? The matchup is Hawaii's potential great passing attack against a bad secondary, and Stanford's good potential rushing attack against a bad rushing defense. I like Hawaii to have a better day passing the ball. I think there's a higher upside in that passing attack than there is in Stanford's rushing attack on the ground. I know I picked a bit of a lower score. I think it's going to be a sloppy game. There'll be some turnovers, some jitters early on, some mistakes, although I could certainly see it being higher scoring when it's all said and done. For me, I think it's going to be a little more of a lower scoring game. Hawaii will put some points up in the second half and get a win jump done and get the job done on the island here. Yes, I know California is not super far from Hawaii, but you still got to travel out there. It's still 5 hours, I think, something like that, the time difference. So it's still an adjustment for any team that heads out to Hawaii, no matter where you are in the country. So that's still factored into it, no matter what, in my opinion. This is a Stanford team that was absolutely brutal last year. I don't think they're going to get much better. They struggled so many times across the board. They just were a bad team last year. I think this is a Hawaii team that profiles to be better and probably makes a bowl game this year in the Mountain West. I think out on the island, I feel pretty good about this game. I like Hawaii here to get the job done, win this game outright and cover, the 2-point spread that we see that shifted to them. A lot of money obviously is moving in on this game with the way that the line has moved rapidly over the past couple of weeks. Good game on national television on CBS, a very fun game to start off the season on CBS. I think Hawaii is going to finally get the job done for me. I'm quite confident in the Rainbow Warriors this year, and I'm excited to watch this game. This would be a big win for that program. A win over a Power 4 team, no matter how bad of a Power 4 team is always a massive thing to put on your belt here. Would love to see this for Hawaii.
Yeah, I'm not really sure if the time zone change has ever really proved to be a major difference maker, though. This is also week 0. If it was middle of the year, that'd be one thing, but, they're probably going to get out there a little bit early. They're not going to be as jet lagged as you would be come like week 6 or something like that. So I'm not really as concerned about their road trip, even though it is a bit of a hike out there. Nice little plane ride to the beautiful state of Hawaii. This will be a fun game. I think it's the top one outside of the ranked matchup, of course, on this week 0 slate. I think this will be a very entertaining one. Glad this is the nightcap. Another friendly wager. Can't wait to see how this one plays out. I also think I called Micah Alado Mitch a few times, so I apologize for that. Just a error on my end. That's going to be it for today's episode. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.